October 1962. For 13 days, the world held its breath, teetering on the precipice of nuclear annihilation. This is the story of how we almost didn't make it. The story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The early 1960s were a time of deep-seated fear. The Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, dividing the world into two ideological camps: the Democratic West, led by the United States, and the Communist East, led by the Soviet Union. Both superpowers were locked in a terrifying arms race, stockpiling enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet many times over. Schoolchildren practiced duck and cover drills, and families built fallout shelters in their backyards. The threat of nuclear war wasn't an abstract concept, it was a daily, palpable anxiety. In this powder keg of a world, a small island nation 90 miles off the coast of Florida became the flashpoint. Cuba, under the leadership of Fidel Castro, had aligned itself with the Soviet Union. For Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, this was a strategic opportunity. The United States had placed Jupiter missiles in Turkey, right on the Soviet Union's doorstep. Khrushchev decided to level the playing field. In a secret operation codenamed Anadir, the Soviets began shipping nuclear missiles and the personnel to operate them to Cuba. It was a gamble of monumental proportions. On the morning of October 16, 1962, President John F. Kennedy was shown irrefutable evidence. High-altitude U-2 spy plane photographs revealed missile launch sites under construction in the Cuban countryside. The missiles were medium-range and intermediate-range, once operational. They could strike major American cities, including Washington, D.C. Within minutes, the threat was no longer thousands of miles away, it was imminent. Sitting right off the American coast, the White House became a pressure cooker. President Kennedy assembled a group of his most trusted advisors, a team that would become known as the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or EXCOM. The options on the table were grim. The military's top brass, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, argued for an immediate, massive airstrike on the missile sites, followed by a full-scale invasion of Cuba. They saw any other course as a sign of weakness. But Kennedy was haunted by the potential consequences. An attack on Cuba would almost certainly kill Soviet personnel, an act of war that could trigger a retaliatory strike from the USSR. The first move in a nuclear exchange could be the last move for humanity. He later estimated the odds of such an outcome as between 1 in 3 and even. Others, like his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, advocated for a more measured approach. They argued for a diplomatic solution, a way to de-escalate without firing a shot. The debates inside EXCOM were intense, fraught with tension and exhaustion. For days, the men argued, strategized, and second-guessed, knowing that the fate of civilization rested on their decisions. The world, unaware of the specifics, could sense the escalating crisis. News reports were vague but ominous. Military forces were put on high alert. An air of dread settled over the globe. After days of deliberation, Kennedy chose a middle path. Not an act of war, but a show of strength. On the evening of October 22, he addressed the nation in a televised speech that sent shockwaves around the world. He announced the discovery of the missiles and declared a quarantine and naval blockade around Cuba to prevent further Soviet military shipments from reaching the island. He made it clear that the launch of any missile from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere would be regarded as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response. The line had been drawn. The world watched as a ring of American warships, 180 of them, took up positions in the Atlantic. Soviet ships carrying more missiles and military equipment were steaming towards them. The question on everyone's mind was, would the Soviet ships stop, or would they try to run the blockade? A confrontation at sea seemed inevitable. A single shot could ignite a global thermonuclear war. This was the moment of maximum danger. In the Atlantic, American destroyers played a tense cat-and-mouse game with Soviet submarines, some of which were armed with nuclear-tipped torpedoes. In one harrowing incident, the USS Beale dropped practice depth charges to force a Soviet sub to surface, unaware that the sub's captain, cut off from Moscow, was authorized to launch his nuclear weapon if his vessel was breached. Only the refusal of one of his fellow officers, Vasily Arkhipov, prevented the launch. The world was saved by the quiet courage of a man few would ever know. Back in the corridors of power, a frantic and complex back-channel negotiation was underway. A series of letters, both formal and deeply personal, were exchanged between Kennedy and Khrushchev. Khrushchev's messages were a mix of bluster and genuine fear, revealing a leader who, like Kennedy, had perhaps underestimated the speed at which events could spiral out of his control. He wrote, "We and you ought not now to pull on the ends of the rope in which you have tied the knot of war." On Saturday, October 27th, a Black Saturday, the crisis reached its peak. A U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba by a Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missile, killing the pilot, Major Rudolf Anderson. The Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously demanded an immediate retaliatory strike. Kennedy resisted. He refused to be pushed into a war. That same day, a secret deal was proposed. Through his brother Robert, Kennedy sent a message to the Soviet ambassador. The United States would publicly pledge not to invade Cuba if the Soviets removed the missiles under UN supervision. But there was a second, secret component. The U.S. would also agree to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. This part of the deal would have to remain confidential. Publicly, it would look like a concession made under duress, a sign of weakness to America's NATO allies. The world waited. Sunday morning, October 28th, dawned with unbearable tension. Then, the message came. Radio Moscow broadcast a statement from Premier Khrushchev. The Soviet Union had agreed to dismantle the missile sites and return the weapons to the USSR. The crisis was over. A collective sigh of relief washed over the planet. In cities from New York to Moscow, London to Tokyo, people emerged from the shadow of fear. The immediate danger had passed. The quarantine was lifted, the Soviet ships turned back, and the missile sites in Cuba were dismantled. Slowly, the world began to return to a state of normalcy. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a profound lesson for both superpowers. It brought Kennedy and Khrushchev to the edge of the abyss, and in staring into it, they recognized their shared interest in survival. In the aftermath, a direct communication link, the hotline, was established between Washington and Moscow to prevent future miscalculations. And less than a year later, the two nations, along with the United Kingdom, signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the first significant step in controlling the nuclear arms race. The 13 days in October 1962 were a turning point in the Cold War, a moment when humanity faced its own extinction and chose a different path. It was a story of immense pressure, secret diplomacy, and leaders who, when faced with the ultimate choice, found the wisdom and restraint to step back from the brink. It was the day the world almost ended, a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the catastrophic consequences of failure. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Stay curious.